often and rightly Christians say, well, we're image bearers. That's true. Okay, what does that mean? AI seems to commodify a lot of things in terms of, quote, intelligence. It's thinking, it's processing. A lot of people think, well, maybe this means it'll gain consciousness at some point. It'll be different than us. It'll be better than us. That kind of blurs the line between what does it mean to be human? Not our value, our dignity and worth isn't based on what we do, but it's actually based on who we are.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to The Narrative. Mike Andrews, David Mahan with you. The long absent Mike Andrews. Feels like I've been away forever from you on the podcast, David. It's good to see you.
You don't love us, man. You don't love us.
I do love you. It has just been a few crazy weeks around here. You know, we're in summer vacation schedule and all that stuff. And, you know, we're just planning this little summit thing that we got going on.
And there's your priorities straight.
All these bills that we're going to talk about that have just suddenly burst free like a river running wild yesterday. It was quite the week for you at the State House, I know. And
I feel like it's been 2 weeks.
How late were you over there yesterday? That's the thing that I want to know.
I didn't stay there late because things were going pretty slow. Most of us went home. I'm just sitting there next to my wife in bed on the computer, and I'm laughing, and I got my headphones in, and she's frustrated that I'm making noise. But a lot of that was done at home. I just talked to a member. She didn't get home till 12:30 last night.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was like a mini lame duck, right? Usually it only happens at the end of a General Assembly, you know, where everybody has Christmas tree bills. They start dumping stuff in. It was like a mini version of that right before break.
Yeah, and the break this year, I think, is part of the reason for what we saw yesterday, just because it's going to be a little bit longer, more than likely, with the election year and everything like that. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, you had that for sure, and then you also had the fact that they say this is the least effective General Assembly, meaning the least amount of bills ever to get passed in the Ohio history. And so, you know, wanting to fix that a little bit before break. And so there was just a ton of legislation that went down. And a lot of it was bills getting amended, right? So taking a bill that was already gone through the paces in the Senate, it's sitting in the House, we're going to throw a bunch of stuff, 6 amendments onto that, and then we'll send it back over to the Senate real quick to get passed. And so there was a lot of that going on. So it's always fast and furious. It's a lot of texting back and forth with members to figure out what's going on, where's what, you know. And it went on probably, well, for us until about 11:45 at night.
But it ended up being a good night for CCV and for Ohio families and kids in general, because one major bill that we wanted to talk about today and maybe focus all of our time on today is the bathroom bill. Yeah. This was House Bill 183. So just walk us through what that bill is and what yesterday looked like for the bathroom bill.
House Bill 183, they call it the bathroom bill, simply says only females can be in female spaces and biological males in biological spaces. And that includes bathrooms, locker rooms, overnight accommodations, primarily for schools, right? That bill deals primarily with schools and colleges, universities. Real straightforward bill. Polling is great across the state. Polling is great across the country. But it got jammed up in committee at first, and then it got jammed up at just sitting on the floor of the House. And until this week, there was no talk of it getting a vote, no talk of getting amended into anything outside the bill sponsors, right, who have done a great job, Representative Byrd and Representative Lear doing a phenomenal job driving it. But there was no desire from leadership and the committee chairs to get it moving any further until yesterday, until this week. And so, it took a lot of us by surprise, and when it moved fast.
Yeah, and I think it's worth, well, number one, if people want kind of a bigger overview of this bill, I'd refer them back to our podcast that we did with Pastor Van Holloway and his wife from Xenia, which was the YMCA case that we've talked about, and I think was a lot of impetus behind that incident leading to this bill. So we've got a podcast on that you can go back and listen to. But along those lines, there was also some advocacy that was taking place. You'd set something up Tuesday, if I remember correctly.
Yes, with the Bevan family. Okay. So they have been involved. The Holloway family was here last week for the Title IX event that went on at the State House. Holloway did a great job at that event. And then this week we scheduled for Pastor Bevan, whose wife and 3 daughters were in the bathroom with that guy, Darren, 350-pound individual who was butt naked, just watching little girls walking around. Now, his daughter, one of them was 12, another one was 16 at the time. And the 12-year-old girl had to stand there while this big man, who's completely nude, walks up on her, right, and starts saying, "Don't I know you?" and would not take no for an answer. Can you imagine what she felt like? Well, they came in town to tell that story. Office to office, we met with Bill Seitz on the street. We met with several in the atrium, wherever we could find members. They told their story, and to everybody, there was some Blue 22 folks, there was some Integrity Caucus folks, and everybody heard, right? And even before that, our good friend Riley Gaines had a video of a hearing that took place where that case came up and brought it, to the top of the surface. And that got like 125,000 views. It blew up, and that circulated through the state as well as the nation. And so now everybody's talking about 183 and then also 245, House Bill 245, which was the adult cabaret bill. But both of them address this thing of public indecency and men, being nude or lewd in female or public spaces, and so everybody's talking about it. And yesterday was amazing. I literally, Mike, heard several times that bill is dead. It's not going anywhere. And it was like scraping your fingernails across a chalkboard to hear some of these members who want this bill passed, but just think that it's dead. And we said, with God, all things are possible, right? Like we always say on the podcast, and it's not over till it's over. And when it's over, we start again that day, right? And to see this thing pass in the way that it did was just phenomenal.
Yeah, and it came together pretty late at night. As you said, it was closing in on midnight until this got passed. I believe the final floor vote was 60-31
Yes.
To get it done. So what are the next steps here for the bathroom bill?
Right. So, Mike, like I said, so it started in the Senate, Senate Bill 104, made it over to the House. Last night, the very last thing on the docket, right, was to amend 183 into Senate Bill 104. They had to vote to change, to accept the amendment. Then they had to vote for the bill, and it goes back over to the Senate. And now it just needs a floor vote, right? They need a vote, what they call a vote of concurrence, to say that we agree with the amendments made in the House, and now we need to send it to the governor. So it doesn't need to go through the whole committee process, just needs a floor vote, and we can get this thing done.
Yeah. And one of the real highlights of House Bill 183 that I think we need to point out to our listeners is just the impact of advocacy on a bill.
Yeah.
Because so many times people will hear them say, I don't want to be involved in politics, feels like my vote doesn't matter, all that kind of stuff. But when you see the trajectory that House Bill 183 took, you can actually point to that and say, no, your voice does make a difference, because when you follow our action alerts that CCV sends out and you contact your lawmakers and you tell them that this is something that you want to see passed in the state of Ohio, you can literally change the course of a bill in 24 hours.
Yes. I'm telling you, folks, we say it all the time around here. I know we sound like broken records, but what you do matters. We had one of Nalani, she went to a breakfast this morning, and a longtime staffer of the House said, Nalani, I've never seen anything like this in all my years. The pressure that members put on the Speaker's office to get this even to the floor and amended, had to be amended first, then on the floor. It was crazy. She said, I've never seen anything like it. If the members are moving and speaking like that on the last day before break, everybody's got other bills that they're worrying about getting run, but all of them talking about 183, that's only because you out there are speaking this thing up. It's been on the radio. Like I said, Riley Gaines did her thing, and you all responded phenomenally. And so thank you again. Culture doesn't change over there. Gridlock doesn't change over there. Like we saw yesterday and like we saw with House Bill 68, without you all being used of God in the way you were yesterday.
And there's still the element of bills like the cabaret bill, the adult cabaret bill, and the bathroom bill that even need to be passed. It's just kind of frustrating that we're at that point where you rightly called this public indecency laws, that we need these laws because the culture is going toward the side of, well, if this is an issue, we're going to err toward the people, the adults on this issue. We're not going to err toward protecting children. And now we need legislation to make that happen. And that's why we need voices to rise up and really make sure we get this stuff passed, because the common sense of protecting kids above anything else has just gone out the window.
And, you know, when the scripture says that when the righteous are in power, the people rejoice. But when the wicked are in power, the people mourn. This is something, man, that I've not seen. Like I've never understood that scripture like I've seen it until I got to CCV. But I just heard stories of even folks that are on the other side of the aisle who not one of them voted for this bill yesterday. Not one. But I know that there are several, based on what I just heard, you know, before this podcast, that said, thank you for getting this done. Thank you for getting 183 across the line and into law, because enough is enough, right? They will never say that in the media. They will lose their financing for their campaigns. But yesterday, several of them stopped some of the members and said, thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such an encouraging word, because amid all that gridlock, to know that there are people who really want to see this get done and are celebrating it, even if they didn't vote for it. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing.
And you know what? It's, you know, not voting for, you know, voting for something is not the only way we get it across the finish line, right? It's one thing to be silent, and it's another thing to fight against, right? Certain righteous bills. And so, listen, if all we can get out of some of these members is just silence, you know, just them not fighting against us is enough for me.
Well, it's a good day yesterday. It was worth celebrating. And we're going to pivot now to our conversation on the narrative, talking with Jason Thacker. I'm bummed that I didn't get to participate in this conversation last week on Christians and AI. I'm curious, David, just in general, what was your take on what Jason had to say about how we should interact with that technology?
Really interesting take. I never thought it was going to go that way, but just a lot of good background theologically on why the church needs to engage and use the tool of technology. I was a little I was struck because we're dealing with AI. I've kind of been working on this AI pornography stuff in the Senate, and I'm a little leery of AI, but he had a different take, and I think it'll be interesting for folks to hear.
Yeah, just trying to generate conversation and debate, because it's not going away.
Right.
It's here. It's here. It's here, and it's going to stay. So we might as well learn how, or get some framework for how to think about it and interact with it.
And we probably already are in ways that we don't even understand.
Yeah, so that's a good tee up for the conversation. I hope you'll enjoy it and stick around to hear it on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org.
Today we have Jason Thacker with us, and Jason serves as senior fellow focused on pro-life and other bioethic issues, including abortion, reproductive technologies, medical care, euthanasia, and end-of-life decision-making. He also leads the ERLC Research Institute, in addition to his work at the ERLC. He'll tell us what that is. He serves as an assistant professor of philosophy and ethics at Boyce College and Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. He is the author or editor of several books, including the Essentials in Christian Ethics series, Baptist Social Ethics, The Age of AI, Following Jesus in a Digital Age, and The Digital Public Square. He is a graduate of the University of Tennessee and Southern Seminary, where he is currently a PhD candidate in Christian ethics and public theology. Man, Jason, that's a mouthful, my brother. I'm so glad and humbled to have you on The Narrative. How are you?
Doing really well. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, Jason, before we get into all this AI business, tell us who you are, your hobbies, favorite foods, social security number, whatever makes you comfortable.
Well, my name is Jason Thacker. Obviously, you've already covered that. My wife, the most important thing about me outside of my faith in Christ is my wife. We've been married just over 10 years and we have
Okay.
two boys. We live here in Louisville, Kentucky. I served for about a decade at the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission in a full-time capacity before shifting to a full-time teaching role here at Boyce College and Southern Seminary. And still, as you noted, serve as a senior fellow and director of the Research Institute, which basically means that I get to do a couple different things. I not only get to teach and write on ethics and philosophy and cultural engagement, but then also do a lot of research into those things, especially kind of around policy related matters, which I know something that's near and dear to you all and the work that you do there. And so just kind of being able to bridge both of those gaps to be able to teach and to write, but also to kind of speak into a lot of the policy issues. And then specifically with the AI stuff and technology, this is something I've been focused on for a number of years. It's really fun to be able to see where everybody is now starting to talk about some of the things that I've been researching and writing about for a number of years, and to see how the Lord is bringing a lot of wisdom and insight. There are new Christian leaders being raised up to speak into these issues, to speak wisdom, both truth and grace. And it's a really exciting time to be stepping into this space, and a very important time, especially for Christians.
That's interesting, man. How did you get started, Jason, in all of this AI area, right? Like this is new to me, and I'm working on legislation, that talks about AI, and I got to figure out what the heck is it. So,
Yeah.
like, how did you get started on this, like years before now?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. This is not something I ever really sought out to do per se, but it was just kind of the right time at the right place, and there was a right opportunity. It was actually all started back years ago. I was working in the communications field, specifically at the ERLC, and was reading a book entitled Homo Deus, which is the fancy Latin way to say the God Man. And it was the subtitle is a really interesting one, A Brief History of Tomorrow. And the idea is that you had this Israeli scholar who had been writing and talking about the nature of humanity and the history of humanity, where we are, what's going on. But this was a book where he started to kind of think about the future. Where are we heading, especially with the rise of a lot of emerging technologies, not just AI, but related to that and other type of technologies. And so it was interesting as I was reading this book, I was really struck. Not only is Harari not coming to this from a Christian perspective, quite obviously, but also, there were a lot of things that he was predicting or saying that was going to happen that kind of hit me the wrong way. It didn't start to jive with a lot of the things that I think about from a Christian worldview and kind of the perspective of a scripture inspired kind of understanding of the nature of culture or where we're heading and different
Right.
things. And so I started writing on it. The more I wrote on it, the more I read, the more I read, the more I wrote. And that started to snowball into a project in 2019 called Artificial Intelligence, an Evangelical Statement of Principles. So back in 2019, well before even the Roman Catholic Church had an official statement of ethical principles, the Southern Baptist Convention was leading on these in April of 2019, releasing these statement of principles, helping people not only to say, hey, this is coming, but here's some of the ways we can think about it in light of what we know about God, what we know about that central question, that animating question, I think especially important in this debate of what does it mean to be human? And then how we interact with the world around us, how we interact with our neighbors, how we interact in our communities, and then how do we think about these emerging technologies? We don't do so kind of from a sheer optimism perspective. It's all good. There's some bad mixed in, but by and large, it's all good. Let's pursue innovation for innovation's sake. But then the flip side is there's a lot of Christians, especially, but even people wider in our culture, who would say, we need to avoid this. We need to stop all of this. We need to pause it. This is all bad. This is going down a bad, bad path. We need to slow down. And
Hmm.
there's wisdom in both approaches in many ways. And so what I started to do was kind of chart out a distinctly Christian perspective, not just on AI, but in kind of technology and culture and how we navigate some of those questions. So back in 2019, started writing that. Was also working on my first book, The Age of AI, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity, helping to Christians not only to know what's going on. Let's talk about the nature of AI. This isn't as simple as sometimes it's communicated in our culture. There's more going on here, but also kind of getting to some of those fundamental questions. I think one of the things that many listeners will be familiar with is when we hear of a new technology, we hear of an innovation. Often it's portrayed as we've never done this before. We don't know what's going on. We don't know the type of questions to ask. It's all new. And there's an element of truth to that. But one of the things that's interesting, especially with technological development, is that we're asking the same age-old questions we've always asked as humans, but we're asking them in light of some new opportunities, i.e., what does it mean to be human? What is good? What is justice? What is a good society? How do we organize and structure in light of some of the new innovations and challenges, as well as the opportunities we face? And
Mm-hmm.
so, just kind of thinking through a kind of um, a more hopeful, kind of confident perspective for Christians, not to be just kind of optimistic for optimism's sake, but
Right.
also not being fearful and kind of reserved and scared of the future. We know that Jesus is alive. We know that
That's
Jesus is
right.
sitting at the right hand of the Father. So we engage in culture, but specifically even the conversations around AI with kind of a hopeful realism, a
Oh,
hopeful tone of knowing that he has won the victory, that is the end of the story, and we live in light of those truths. If that's true, then we can engage these technologies as they are and
mm.
culture as it is, rather than just the way we want it to be.
Well, you could probably just preach on that. I can hear it in your voice, but and we may do that towards the end. But Jason, for those that have not been exposed to great works like iRobot and Will Smith, what is AI? Like what?
Yeah.
How does it work? Yeah, what kind of thing is it?
Yeah, that's one of the best questions someone can ask. I think a lot of times people are nervous to say, "What is AI?" But the reality is that is a baseline question where there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think even as kind of you referenced, I think many of us are more formed by Hollywood and kind of movies and plots and stories and even books and sci-fi than we are about reality. Others of us think that AI is this brand new thing that just kind of hit the public square, 2 or 3 years ago, especially with generative AI. When we slow down and actually look at the history of AI, it kind of the way we can define it is non-biological intelligence, specifically the ability of a computer to perform a human-like task. Now, that's a really baseline definition, but it's the ability of a computer to, quote, think, and I say, quote, intentionally. I think there's a difference in the way that a computer processes data and information and the way that a human being thinks. But
Okay.
this idea of it's able to make certain decisions. Now, these can be really simple decisions. Think about things like a Nest thermostat. My thermostat can change the temperature based on the sun coming in or based on my preferences. It knows that, my family, we like to sleep when it's kind of chilly in our house, but when we wake up, we want it to warm up a little bit. So it learns that over time. So any of these smart devices, whether it's our smartphone, whether it's our social media algorithms and apps, whether it's our email, whether it's the stock exchange, there's a lot of smart technologies today and even smart appliances have a form of artificial intelligence baked in. This idea of like an algorithm. So reality is that AI is not, it is an exciting field, but it's not even a new field per se. It was actually, the term was coined in 1957 by John McCarthy at the Dartmouth Summer Research Institute. In 1950s, we're talking the ability of like Alan Turing. Many listeners may be familiar with Turing and his Enigma machine that helped to kind of turn the tide in World War II toward the Allies being able to break the Nazi code. But Alan Turing also worked on a lot of these ideas of computers being able to make certain decisions based on sets of data, based on certain kind of training protocols. And so you had these early kind of rudimentary forms of artificial intelligence. Then there's been growth, and then there's also been kind of decline. There's been a AI winters where things weren't growing very fast. But then, especially with faster computers, more access to data, a lot of money being pumped into this industry throughout the 90s, early 2000s, you start to see kind of a boom and kind of a breaking point where things start to really take off. And then right at, the 2022, you really see kind of the public kind of fascination with artificial intelligence really take hold, especially with things like OpenAI's ChatGPT and other generative AI tools, where it's become almost ubiquitous in our society. But I say all that to say, every single one of us are utilizing artificial intelligence every single day, whether we realize it or not.
So
From our
Jason,
shopping apps and other things, it's everywhere. We just often don't think about it or recognize it.
so what's the big deal? I mean, that sounds like it's awesome, right? It is awesome. We're all using it in some shape or another, and we may not even know we are. So why is that dangerous? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm working on bills like SB 217, right? That is dealing with AI generated child pornography. You know, they're thinking about requiring these AI platforms to put on watermarks so that folks can tell, is it real or is it Memorex? Like listening to you right now, and I know we're just in the beginning of this thing, it sounds like this is exciting, this is new, this is good. Why are people worried or concerned about AI?
Well, a lot of that comes down to the way we utilize artificial intelligence. It's when you have very low stake games in terms of, the product that's recommended to you on Amazon or what comes up next in your Netflix queue. That's a pretty low stakes kind of environment. If it gets something wrong, oh well, I didn't really like that show. That's totally fine. I just kind of move on. When we start to utilize AI in more important context, something where the stakes are a lot higher, specifically around human dignity, you think about the nature of work or warfare or the economy. You start to think about the use in medicine. You start to think about these kind of higher stakes realities where artificial intelligence is being used. These systems are not perfect. They make mistakes all the time. Some of those mistakes, again, if it recommends a show that I don't actually like, no big deal. But if it misdiagnoses something or if it misfires a weapon, that can have grave consequences. And specifically in terms of human dignity, when we think about the role of automation, the role of artificial intelligence in work, when you start to see jobs being lost or jobs being created, jobs being kind of changed and altered, where you start to see this kind of push, especially right now, amidst kind of the hype of artificial intelligence, everyone becoming an AI company and starting to utilize these tools, because they're often right some of the time, we often assume they're right all of the time. When we unhealthily kind of rely upon these tools, again, if it's a Netflix recommendation, not that big of a deal. But if it's something very high stakes, you can see human dignity really being imperiled there. So it could be something from AI generated artwork. You think of trademark infringement. You think of those type of ideas. You think of things like CSAM and other child abuse, child sexual abuse material. You think of the way this is revolutionizing the nature of work, how it's changing the nature of warfare and the use of automated tools or semi-autonomous or autonomous weapon systems. This AI is not just one little question. It's actually an element of so many other important areas that we're talking about as society. But often we just kind of rush in without a lot of understanding, not only of what AI is, but also where we're heading. And that's, I think, one of the most concerning elements of this conversation is that many people assume, oh, look at all the good. Well, there is a lot of good, but there's also some not so good stuff mixed
Right.
into this. But then also where we're heading. We have these ideas that these machines are going to wake up one day. They're going to take over. This is kind of that sci-fi Hollywood movie plot where the robots take over type of thing. We're talking about different types of artificial intelligence, but often just kind of lumped under this big umbrella of AI. And the
Mm-hmm.
reality is there's narrow AI, there's broad AI, there's things like super intelligence, and the debate ensues even amongst Christian philosophers, but even amongst kind of philosophers in general about where we're heading, what's possible. And
Yep.
I think a lot of this comes down to that central question that Christians have an answer to is what does it mean to be human? And how does that then shape how we
Right.
engage in the world around us?
Because and I want to spend some time on that, right? The identity piece of this.
Yeah.
Because looking at some of the legislation around the country, and I'm the policy director here at Center for Christian Virtue, and so this is kind of my space, but it's about stolen identity or misrepresenting someone's identity. And I think about Romans 12:2, right? Like, therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service. But then it says, and do not be conformed to this world, right? Or the pattern of this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may prove the will of God, right? Acceptable will of God. Two things in that struck me was when I'm started to, go down this road of AI, the whole verse 1 where it says, present your bodies. I don't know if I've ever looked at it quite this time the way I have in the past. And then the whole transforming, right? Not conforming, but transforming ourselves. What I've learned about AI so far, there's a lot of formation that's taking place in our minds, not just kids, but adults. And then there's a whole lot of presenting people's bodies that in manners that may not be real, right? Don't you have to train AI? So when you talk about CSAM, I'm hearing that it's almost hard to decipher what's real abuse material from what's fake, but the fake has to be trained by the real. It's insane. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that Romans 12:2 is one of the kind of the banner verses because it speaks to one of the central aspects, I believe, of this conversation, not just about AI, but of technology in general. Note there that Paul says, do not be conformed.
Right.
He's not saying if you're conformed. He's not saying if you're being shaped into the
We are
patterns and
being
ways of
formed.
this world. You are be. He's saying do not be. He's exhorting us, commanding us not to be, because we are to be transformed by the renewal of the Holy Spirit. That idea that we are being conformed to this world speaks to this reality that nothing is neutral. You know this working in the policy space. No policy, no law is neutral. Nothing can be neutral. It always has a vision of the good life, a vision of what ought to be in that sense, especially from an ethical perspective. The same is true in this space with technology. No technology is morally neutral. Yes, it does matter how we utilize them. We can utilize certain technologies for good or for ill, but that doesn't mean that the technology is somehow morally neutral. Now, don't, stick with me here because this really matters. The question is, if we think of social media, for example, well, we think of all the good that can come of it, how we can connect. I can listen to the podcast, I can follow the work that you all are doing, but I also can share a lot of evil things. And, I'm exposed to misinformation. I'm exposed to pornography. I'm exposed to conspiracy theories. I'm exposed to hate and vitriol and division. At the same time, I can be encouraged. So, is it good or is it bad? Well, the reality is that it's not neutral because it's doing something to us. Yes, it matters how you use them, but it also matters there are values, there are prejudices, there are purposes to these tools. Specifically with AI, it's changing us, it's forming us, it's changing our view of who God is. What does it mean? What does it mean that God is wholly other, that he alone creates, that we make things, that, that kind of blurring that division between who God is and what does it mean to be human? That central question of what does it mean to be human? Often, and rightly, Christians say, well, we're image bearers. That's true. Okay, what does that mean? AI seems to commodify a lot of things in terms of, quote, intelligence. It's thinking, it's processing. A lot of people think, well, maybe this means it'll gain consciousness at some point. It'll be different than us. It'll be better than us. That kind of blurs the line between what does it mean to be human? Not our value, our dignity and worth isn't based on what we do, but it's actually based on who we are. AI comes in and actually is doing a lot of things. And so we often give value and agency to that. So you see
Right.
that kind of blurring the line between what does it mean to be human and
Yeah.
what is this kind of artificial intelligent machine? And that then naturally shapes the way that we interact with the world around
I'm
us.
gonna jump in there, Jason, and we're gonna talk about this. What does it mean to be human piece? But I'm let's like Facebook, social media, where you've got these apps where you can transform how you look, right? And I remember when that first started, and I saw a couple of people, that bodybuilder type, with their face, and then swimsuit models with their face, and it was funny at first, but then like the pics keep coming, and I'm like, man, this is really getting into your head, right? It's like usually we use technology to do something for us, to serve a greater purpose. But now it seems like we're using technology to make ourselves
Yeah.
into some other image. And I think of Psalm 100, where it says, "I know the Lord is God; He has made us, and not we ourselves." Right. And so let's talk about that whole concept of what does it mean to be human, because we've got folks that are using AI to try to redefine humanity.
Exactly right. And part of this is it's a much larger conversation that we probably don't have time to dive into, but
Right.
kind of where we are in kind of cultural history, kind of philosophical history is that we often have this emphasis on the individual. The individual reigns supreme. It's my truth, it's my body, it's my choice, it's my reality, it's about me. Technology feeds that lie because it makes things very personalized. It makes things about me, the way I want to present myself, the way I want to be identified, the way that I want to interact with the world around me. You think of this in terms of my post, my likes, my platform, my this, my this. It's all about me, 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 me. The Christian ethic is actually revolutionary in the sense, calling us back to our original design. Jesus' own words in Matthew 22:37-39, he says to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and
Hmm.
to love your neighbors yourself. Many before me have said this rightfully. They say that the whole sum of the Christian ethic is other oriented. It's not about me, it's about God, it's about others, it's other oriented, this love of another. And so it's really interesting, especially where we are in cultural history, that technology kind of feeds this lie that it's all about me and my truth, my body, my choice. It's all about what I want rather than kind of this external reality around us. AI, but also other forms of technology tend to alter the way that we not only perceive reality, but even the ways that we understand reality. Think about the nature of truth itself. We see this especially prevalent in the conversations with things like misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, propaganda, that we can present reality, we can present truth in a way that's contrary to what truly is, not only what is in the sense of reality, but also in the sense of what is actually true. We can present ourselves in a certain way. We can present ideas that don't actually align, but we can deceive people in that sense. So
Hmm.
it comes back to this fundamental question of not only who is God, that he is ultimate reality, that he is the creator of the universe and we are his creatures. We are beholden to an external standard. We're beholden to God's plan, God's design, the way that God has designed not only the nature of reality, but what is truly true. It's not up to us to get to decide those things, but sometimes these technologies, specifically powerful emerging technologies like AI, make us feel like we can be like God or we can be gods in ourselves. We can manipulate things to our will, to our desires, rather than aligning our will and our desires to what's external that God has created. I say all that to say is that AI is one of the tools. It's not the only thing, but it is one of those things that gives us this power of thinking we can do more than we ought, or just because we can do something, we should do something. That's that question of ethics and wisdom. What it means to be human is obviously to be an image bearer of God,
Image
Genesis
bearer.
one
That's right.
26 to 28, and to live in light of the reality that he is God and we are not.
Right. And we can't be anything we want to be. Like we tell our kids all the
Exactly.
time that we are born with a purpose. Listen, I want to just real quick. One, what can parents do to protect their kids? And then if you have any kind of closing statements as we wrap here, love to hear them.
Yeah, especially with parents. I wrote a little book a couple years ago called A Student's Guide to Social Media. It's about 60 pages. And what it's designed to do, it's for teenagers to help them think about not only just technology in general, but specifically their use of social media. The reality is, I think a lot of parents sometimes say, oh, this is kind of a young person problem, the kids these days. That's true. Children do have unique temptations and kind of being given over to certain kind of patterns and habits with technology. But the reality is that technology is shaping and informing all of us. So one of the encouragements I would give to parents is the same thing I give to children, the same thing I give to all of us, is that technology is designed to, it's always about more, better, faster, stronger. It's all about convenience. It's all about efficiency. One of the best things we can do is to seek to try to slow down, not to just slow down for being, just for the sake of being slow, but to slow down and ask the hard questions. What is technology? What is AI? To ask some of those kind of fundamental questions, and also to seek wisdom. So, one of the things that we do with our kids and that we've done for ourselves is putting certain types of limitations on our phone. And this isn't like a 5 ways to write your relationship with technology or artificial intelligence, but to put some kind of friction points to say, the average social media user spends anywhere between 5.5 to 6.5 hours a day on social media. Let's limit that. Let's cut that back a little bit. Let's have some downtime where we're not always on our devices on our phones. Like my phone, for example, goes black at 8:15 and I can't really use it much outside of phone calls and text messages till about 7:30 in the morning. That's creating some needed space, not just for me as a father, but even for my own kids who have limits to certain things. We often think of limits as kind of hampering what I want, but sometimes we need to train our desires and the things we want around what truly is, what's actually good for us.
Mm.
So part of that slowing down is to help us to realize, to create some of that space, to have rich conversations, to admit, especially as parents, one of the common conversations in our house is not, my son spending too much time on their Switch or spending too much time on an iPad or something like that. It's also mom and dad saying, I've been on my phone a lot lately. That affects my kids. It affects me. It affects our relationship and our family. And so just being honest about those things, talking about those things, having conversations. And then part of that too is that space to learn, to ask the big questions, to read some books, to dive deep into these things. Again, not just to do things because we can, but to ask that question of should we do something? Ought we do something? Again, innovation is not bad. I'm very optimistic about technology in some ways, but I'm also realistic to say these technologies are not neutral. They're doing something to us, and we need to slow down to think about those things.
Well, as informative as this was, Jason, I know we're probably left folks with a lot of questions. Where can they get more answers, either from things that you have written or a website? Where can they hear more about you?
Yeah, especially around the conversation with artificial intelligence. If you go to ERLC.com with this Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, ERLC.com/AI, we have that statement of principles that I referenced earlier that came out in 2019, as well as a recent resolution that the Southern Baptist Convention passed on the ethics of artificial intelligence. That's a good kind of jumping off place to kind of get the basics of what's going on, kind of generally how AI is being used, some of the challenges we face from data and privacy to public policy, etc. Get some of those general kind of basic ethical principles. My first book, The Age of AI, it was intentionally written. It's not an academic book. It's for a general reader who wants to learn more and kind of see this within a Christian context. The Age of AI, it's from Zondervan, came out in 2020. And then a lot of it, what we've been talking about in terms of the nature of technology, what it's doing to us, I wrote about in a book called Following Jesus in a Digital Age. This is a really short, accessible book for all readers to dive into fundamental facts of what does it mean to pursue Christ, to prioritize our relationship with Christ in a digital age. What challenges, but also what are some of the opportunities that we face as we navigate the realities before us in a digital age.
Well, Jason Thacker, thank you so much. This has been very informative again, and we are so grateful for you taking time to be with us here talking about AI and Christianity. And family, as always, thank you for joining us this week on The Narrative, and we look forward to being with you again.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.